What holds you back? Often it's not what you know, but what you fail to see. In this episode, we explore the importance of identifying negative influence to truly break free and move forward. Welcome to the new Ashla Podcast. Hello and welcome to the new Ashla Podcast. Today we continue the series inspired by the book, The Light Within, A Journey Through the Axioms of Ashla. I'm your host and author of The Light Within, Justin Gates. Today I'm joined by my regular little helpers here, co-hosts and studio goblins, Michael and Heather.
Hey, family.
So the axiom of light we're going to be talking about today. Before you can break free of negative or improper influences, you must first recognize them. Now, this axiom is going to take us off into a couple of different places. First are those influences that come from the outside of us. And we'll get into, they are many, and we've all experienced them. And then we're going to shift into those negative influences that come from us. So this axiom teaches us the first step to freedom from negativity or improper influences is awareness. Awareness is key here. Because until you can recognize what binds you, you cannot take steps to break free and reclaim your personal power. Wouldn't you guys agree with that?
100%.
You got to kind of know what's holding you back before you can break free from it. I know that seems like an obvious statement, but so many times we are stuck. So many times we get stuck from people and things and environments around us, outside of us, and those things inside of us. So we're going to kick this off talking about the things that these negative influences, and sometimes they're pretty obvious, but a lot of times they're subtle too. Things like people, environments, habits, they shape our behavior in ways and they can hinder our progress. So let's start there, Michael. Looking at this axiom through the lens of external things, that these external negative or improper influences, how does this axiom relate to those for you?
So for me, I think we all have a lot of negative influences in our life that we know are negative influences, but we sort of tolerate them. And I think as I started the healing journey and I started working on myself, you realize a lot of the people in your life are people that are at the same level you are. And when you start to work your way up and do the work on healing and getting your life together, a lot of these forces outside of you will try to bring you back to that level. There's this analogy of crabs in a bucket, and when one crab tries to get out, the other crabs will drag it right back into the bucket. And so there's that aspect when it comes to social situations, and then there's behaviors and habits, like you were saying. And man, is that really the crux of so many people's lives? Because I mean, a habit is learned so easily, and it's to slide into something where you think it's, I'm going to go and I'm going to drink tonight. I remember I had that problem. I drank for a couple years there, and I was really bad about it. And it didn't start that way. It's, I'm going to have a drink tonight. You're drinking, I'll drink. And then it started being on the weekends. Then it started being every other night. Next thing I knew, it's like, man, I'm drinking every night. This isn't good. And when you get there, it's easy to get trapped. I mean, that's what addiction is. That's why there's 12-step programs. That's why there's all these different types of addiction treatment systems out there trying to help people overcome these things. Now, there's a little more than just the behavior of, oh, I'm doing this a lot. Now it's just a part of my habits. There's a lot of what those habits are doing to meet your needs or to compensate in your life to help you cope with whatever's going on. And I think that's really the key there. But that's just to touch on a couple of those things you're talking about as far as external influences. And we'll dive more into these.
Yeah, Michael, you touched upon habits. Those are a big one because a lot of times they kind of come upon us without us knowing. Like you perfectly described, drinking socially, and then when you're by yourself, it's like weekends are fine, and then every other day. And environments are big too, though, because those are more subtle, especially as we're kids. We're growing up in environments, and the negative aspects of our environments don't generally show for most of us, I would say, until we're outside of those environments, whether we move or we grow up and we go do our own thing. And then we kind of,
100%.
yeah, we kind of look back and say, wow, that probably wasn't good. And I'm not talking about those obvious negative things like abuse, people who are food insecure, people who are home insecure, people who really kind of went through the obvious things in their environments that shaped them one way or the other.
Well, it's like we have family blueprints, right? So it's like our parents have a blueprint of how life is supposed to work, and their blueprint is a modified version of their parents' blueprint.
Right.
And more often than not, most people hold to those blueprints like they are gospel because it's their understanding of how the world works and how people are supposed to be interact within that.
Right.
And so when you have dysfunctional families, especially growing up, like you're saying, you don't know better. This is all you've known.
Right.
And so as you do get out of that, that's when you start creating your own blueprint. And the more you can separate yourself from your understanding as it is in that moment, the more awareness you can gain on, hey, why is the front door on the second level of this house? Or so I'm in social psychology this semester for school, and we just went over schemas, which is exactly what I'm talking about. And I mean, they come from our families, they come.
For those who don't know, describe that. What's a schema for those who don't know out there?
A schema is the automatic system in our minds we use to understand the world around us. We try to analyze every little thing, we would be overwhelmed and we wouldn't get anything done because there's just too much to process. So schemas form in our mind based on our experiences, our beliefs, and our cultures. And so through that schema, it allows us to take in information, people, places, learning processes, whatever, and it allows it to be automatic for the most part. I mean, it doesn't mean you don't have to learn a skill, but through your lens of your own competency, because there's many of us out there who think we're not good at things, and it's only because we tell ourselves that we don't allow ourselves the ability to learn and grow.
Yep. So, but and as you said, we tend to hold to those blueprints, but we always kind of come at it from, I want to do better for my kids, and then our kids want to do better for their kids, and so on and so forth. So those do change a little bit, but even I even found myself raising my kids in a lot of ways similar to the way I was raised.
Isn't that fascinating? That's one thing that blows my mind with people. Because I know I wanted to have kids real young. I didn't end up doing it, obviously, but it was something I really wanted. And my thought was, I'm going to do better than my parents. I want to
Right.
do this, 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 this. And I know a lot of people like that. And it blows my mind as time goes on. Wow, you're your dad.
Yeah. Well, and in that episode, the student and teacher episode, I had described the lessons that my dad was trying to teach me. I didn't even grasp them until I was going through the same thing. So we do kind of end up there, even if because we say, oh, I want to do better for my kids than my parents did for me. I'm sure my dad and my mom wanted to do better for us than they had it. So,
You know?
but some of these lessons aren't learned until many, many moons after you're removed from the environment. And then at some point, well, and here's another interesting thing that I noticed. There isn't a really good, like when you have a kid and you go to the hospital and your kid is delivered to you. They don't hand you like a whole book on. When you buy a car, you get a book with a car. When you buy a computer, you get a book.
Right.
For kids, there's no books. Now there's lots of books out there from clinical professionals all the way down to the most layman person on how to parent your kid. None of them are right. None of them are wrong either. The problem with raising human beings is that, like each of us right now, every human being born has its own individual things that are not like any other thing that you could read about or learn about. You kind of wing it as you go, but then you tend to wing it the way your parents did, which is really kind of bizarre, but kind of fascinating at the same time. So those
Yeah.
environments, they have a lot of both good and negative things, but they do definitely shape the way we are, whether we like it or not.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I want to add to this, it's a little off topic, but it's just a fascinating thing. I was talking to my fiance's grandmother, and she has 9 kids.
Hmm.
And I was sort of picking her brain about being a mother because my fiance's mom is the youngest of the bunch. And I mean, she's successful, good head on her shoulders, seems like all the kids do. But I was just like, so what was the difference between your first kid and your last kid? And she's like, on the last kid, I stopped trying to control everything. I let the kid be a kid because when we have our first kids, we're so determined not to do what our parents did that we are trying to micromanage every little thing to make sure this kid has a good life. And in turn, it can end up messing him up because I was talking to her oldest aunt and we had a great philosophical discussion. And she was talking about how her mom would hold her and be there for her as she would cry. And as she got older, like before teenage years, her brother would cry in the middle of the night, and the grandmother would let the kid cry. And so she would run in there, take the baby out of the crib, and for most of the years of this young child's life, this older sister would come in and take the baby and try to soothe and relax it because she was trying to care for the kid because the kid was crying and she felt that discomfort. But it shows the controlling aspects of the parent in the beginning passed down to that child, and therefore that child didn't want the discomfort of disharmony with her younger brother. And I'm going down a tangent here, but it's just fascinating watching how much our kids pick up on us. And this goes into our environment where we're talking about not necessarily negative influences, but how all things are influential. All things leave ripples that are picked up on, especially by children.
Yeah, and it does actually tie into what we were talking about because you're talking about a woman who's 3 generations removed from you. So it's not a generational thing. It's not, it just passes down despite whatever generation we're in. So because Heather and I were very similar, our older kids always get mad because we raised their youngest sister different than we did them. Because with the first, second, third, you work through mistakes as a parent and you work through, but you're also working through the fact that these are separate individuals. And what works with this one never worked with this one.
Yes. Well, that's right. Temperaments, right? I mean, as much as I know me and Master Thompson were talking in the last episode about how when we come out, we're pure light, and that's when we start developing our character. One way or another, you come into this world with a certain level of a temperament, and that differs vastly between children. I think you were the one talking about how what was it, 10 generations or so is within the timeline of a child picking up on the behavioral traits of their ancestor.
They
So
certainly
you could have a kid that mirrors your great 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 grandfather.
potentially someone you've never met before.
Yeah,
And not just the psychological kind of wiring that's in there, but they could take on their appearance too, which is really, really fascinating. I love doing the deep dives on the genealogy, not just family tree, but like looking at the genetics of it and all that stuff. It just fascinates me to no end because it seems so random, but so perfectly random at times.
right.
Weird. It's just so weird. So let's talk about people, the negative influences people have on us. Can we think of any examples?
Man, one thing I just got to say as we dive into this part of things, there is a phrase I heard over a decade ago, and it's always been in the back of my mind, and that is you are who you spend your time with.
That's right.
No matter how much you think you are your own individual person, whoever you spend your time with is the personality traits, your level of willpower, like whoever you spend your time with is who you're going to become to
Well,
some degree or another.
you even start to mimic their speech and you start to mimic the way
Mannerisms.
their opinions and you start to mimic if they have any kind of influence on you. And that's why, there's another axiom for this. It's called be your own person. And there's a reason why that's very, very, very important. We haven't touched upon that yet in this series, but it applies here. It's always really important to be your own person because if you don't, the influences that people have around you, both positive and negative, are going to imprint on you. Now, it's great when it's good. It's great when someone is a positive role model or a positive influence in your life, whether they're family, friends, somebody you're listening to on a podcast in the universe somewhere, someone you're watching on TV, a person or a character in a movie that has a positive influence on you, someone you read about in a comic book. We talked about some of the things that influenced us back in the day on a few episodes ago, but all of that is powerful and it's very,
Yeah,
very, very important to not only be your own person because then you can pick the influences that you will accept,
right.
right?
Well, and I think one thing also, when you, especially talking about media and the people we read in books, the heroes we see on TV, I think one of the biggest things that's caused so much chaos in society, and it's something you can see throughout generations, is when heroes are great. They stand for virtue and valor and honor, and they do the right thing. And this ties back to the conversation of the true self and the ideal self, and the gap in between being where self esteem, or the lack thereof, is cultivated. When we try to hold ourselves to the standards of Captain America and we fall short, we beat ourselves up over it because there's just this disconnect between a movie star or movie star versus humans and their raw, flawed nature.
Yeah, well, it gets even crazier depending on the media, right? So when you're reading characters in a book, it's really the only influence of that character you have. Now everything's movies or shows because now there's an extra layer of that influence. It's the actor playing the part. And now you potentially have the things that they're doing outside in their personal lives that, and celebrities can't help but be watched 24 hours a day, it seems like. And that's not good or bad. It's just the way it is,
Yeah.
because that also can be an influence, and especially these days where a lot of people are influenced by people who probably shouldn't be role models, and many of them don't want to be role models. They'll tell you, don't follow me, I'm not a good role model, I'm an actor that does this or this or this, or I'm a musician that does this or this or this, I just like to make music, I'm not here to be a role model. But so many people are influenced by those things, for better or for worse, and a lot of times it's worse. It's getting even worse now for me. Like when I look out at the landscape now, look, when I was a kid, sports athletes were kind of obligated to be good role models for kids, and they did their best to model that. We didn't have as much coverage on them, of course. There wasn't 24-hour paparazzi chasing them around back in the day, because there was really nowhere to show that except for in the papers or whatever. The internet was not a thing. YouTube definitely wasn't around. So those people, but they kind of took on that obligation. If I'm going to be an all-star baseball player, um, or whatever, they were they acted like role models. People
Yeah.
just felt more obligated, I think, than to be role models, and I don't know why that is. We could speculate, I suppose, but when I was a kid, it seemed like role models were out there, and they were, a lot of celebrities were role models, especially for kids.
Right.
Actors who played heroes on TV, or even voice actors who played heroes on TV, they always kind of, in the public eye, they always kind of were they kind of mirrored what their characters were doing. But nowadays, there aren't a lot of role models. They disappeared off the face of the earth, or they just stopped feeling obligated to do so because there was more pressure now because people are following them around, right? I think that might be the reason.
That's honestly crazy how much like social media and videos you see so many celebrities out there being transport parent and being themselves. And just, I mean, you grew up seeing people in the movies and just knowing them through what you thought of them in your mind. And now you get this raw, authentic version of them, and it's very often not what you expect.
Yeah.
One thing I want to add to the about people in your life, and you are who you become. So there's this book that is one of my favorite all-time books, and it's called The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. And if you don't know Robert Greene, my God, fascinating man. And one of the chapters in this book was the law of conformity.
Hmm.
And he really dives into how when you look at mob mentalities and you look at how when people associate themselves with a group, especially a big group, individualism you will start to lose individualism the more you're involved in a community like that. And it's so easy to lose track of that and how important it is for you to remain grounded in your values and in what's important to you, because the more time you spend, the more you're going to want to conform as a way to belong.
Yeah.
And it's human nature to do so. So I don't care how resilient, how black sheep you are, be mindful of the groups you associate with and how much they do taint your personality. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I know taints can be bad, but it's give or take
Colors,
depending the.
colors, personality. Yeah.
There we go.
And we talked about that on the show about championing. causes. It's very important because you can't get lost in that stuff. I'm generally a person who I'm so anti-conforming. I have trouble conforming. It's almost like repulsive to me, but I still keep myself aware enough to know when I'm starting to do that as well. So, negative influences, when we're talking about people, they could be, schoolmates, friends, family members, people and we see this a lot when we try to break free from what our families would consider quote unquote normal. I got it a lot as a kid. I'm sure you did too. I'm sure lots of people out there, when they started
Oh, yeah.
shifting away from what was normal, because these people, for better or for worse, I give them the benefit of the doubt and say they're doing their best to keep us safe and to keep us because they kind of want us to conform a little bit to society, because at some point we have to go out on our own and not get ran over by a bus or mobbed to death or something, because we're out there doing things that are kind of against social norms.
Yeah. Well, and again, we look at the blueprints, right? Or everyone in our lives who loves us, when we go through major changes, especially that don't align with those blueprints, they're doing what they think is best for you by doing what they do, even if they don't know any better.
Yeah, well, because they don't want to see us, they don't want to see us get hurt, they don't want to see us to get anything else. So let's move on to the kind of negative influences we have within. And they can come from lots of different things, but what I want to kind of lean on here is not so much where the inner negative influence comes from, because we've kind of talked about, and all these other things can lead to that. But let's talk about the fact that the majority of our thoughts that reoccur tens of thousands of times every day subconsciously are negative if we are surrounded by negativity, and if we have kind of just accepted that, either emotionally, in our thoughts.
Completely agreed. I mean, it's what it boils down to, especially with negative thoughts, is like you look at these areas that are really dark in your life, and it's like, what are the stories you are telling yourself that are keeping you in this loop? Anything in your life, no matter how bad, I say that, I don't want to put it like that. But when bad things happen in your life, the story you tell about it is how you're going to feel about the event. Is it going to be something that makes you feel helpless and insecure? Or is it something that's going to be, I got empowered through this and I grew beyond this and I was better off without this in my life? The story we tell ourselves of the events in our lives is important and imperative to our unconscious mind, because those stories are part of what feeds that unconscious verbiage.
What's the greatest lie ever told? You
The
guys know?
lie we tell ourselves.
The ones we tell ourselves. And it's even worse than that, because we're not telling it to ourselves consciously anymore. At some point, it just becomes subconscious. This is where mindfulness comes in. Why mindfulness can be very important. Now,
I think another big aspect of this too. Again, we'll do an episode about this later on in full detail, because I think it's just one of the most important parts for anyone on a journey of developing themselves. Shadow work. Now we know if I'm drinking all the time, I have a drinking problem. And again, asking yourself, what need does it fill? Well, when you get into shadow work is taking a flashlight and shining it in those unconscious corners and behaviors and asking yourself, why do I do what I do? And it doesn't just pertain to habits, it pertains to worldviews, it pertains to how we show up in the world. I mean, it's like I realized I was really passive growing up, and I struggled with it my whole adult life. And I thought, that's just who I am. Well, there's the story right there. I'm just a passive person.
mhm.
And it realistically came from moments in my childhood where being passive was what kept me safe. And so whenever I get into a situation where I feel threatened, my mind would start shutting down and put me in that pacified state. And I'd have to cultivate awareness so when that happened, I could be mindful, as you're saying, get in the moment, work through it, and approach things differently when in the heat of the moment.
And I do want to just kind of remind everyone, these things can tap into parts of ourselves that we may not be equipped to handle all at once, especially when we talk about the more subconscious things and how our behaviors are when we're older and we're trying to figure out where all this stuff comes. If you are working with a counselor or something, Don't put our word above theirs, right?
Yeah.
Continue.
It gets worse before it gets better, and it can be a
And if
dark
you're
path
working
when you see it.
well, and whenever I talk about mindfulness or meditation and things like that, I always want to remind everyone, if you're working with someone, if you're working with a professional, their evaluations, their stuff trumps ours. Do not do anything or take any advice from us without first consulting them, because they may have a different plan for you. I don't know what you're working with or what you're working on, but it's just kind of a little reminder I like to put out there in my books, in my podcasts, in my videos, whatever, because
Yeah.
I don't want to screw up your progress.
To go into this kind of work, to make sure you have a guide. It is so imperative to have people to talk about this with that are knowledgeable in it, because it's so easy to see shadows on the wall, and you can end up creating even worse stories than you ever had that are not true. And as Justin's saying, you could lose yourself to it. So definitely follow the advice of someone who is a practitioner and helping you on your journey. But if you do decide this work and you don't have someone like that in your life, please get a mentor, a life coach, or someone who can help you work through these unconscious issues, because it's not something anyone should do alone until they have enough experience to understand what they're doing and what to be aware of.
Well, and I just want to say that everything we talk about comes from personal experience. So I am not a licensed counselor, coach, any of that stuff. Everything I tell you is just based on my personal experience, and take it with a grain of salt. I think it's important. A lot of people out in the world just give their take on things without realizing that they may be doing damage to people. So it's important for me
Yeah.
with meditation, mindfulness, some of these spiritual practices, but they're not just spiritual practices. They're both kind of mind and spirit stuff. And, hopefully we can point you in the right direction, but don't ever take this as professional advice.
Yes.
So being mindful of these things, and this goes into kind of emotional intelligence and things like that. But a lot of these negative influences, as we're talking about the inner work, they do shape us without us knowing, and they can keep us locked in situations or keep us locked in environments, and it's hard to impossible to get out for a lot of people because they don't realize that they have created emotional attachments to these negative thoughts and negative feelings and negative people and influences, or that somehow along the way they normalized it, like, well, this is normal, like we talked about right at the beginning of the show, where we come up in an environment as a kid, and a lot of the things that may have been negative, or not purposely negative, but just negative and shaped us in a negative way, where we have to now undo all that because it was normal. Like, how you don't know any better, right? So
Yeah.
this connects us to the first line of our code, ignorance yet knowledge. Because what this does is it highlights the journey from unconscious patterns to conscious awareness. And that's where we start to move forward to break free from these thoughts and these feelings and these triggers that
Yeah.
it doesn't matter where they came from ultimately. And I know that's kind of a blunt way to say that, but because we either carry that weight or we learn to put it down, or we learn to understand it. And that gets into the shadow work, and that gets into some of the counseling that you may need, or
Yeah.
coaching or whatever. Because once we, and this is again, this goes back to that other axiom, be your own person, right? Because once we start to be mindful, and once we start to do these internal inventories, taking out the trash, like I used to call it, those are very important, because once you start to recognize the things, the people, the environments, the thoughts, the feelings that are counterintuitive to our growth, once we start to apply awareness to that and discernment and starting to understand that, that empowers us. That empowers our personal growth. It aligns us with the pillars of the things we believe in, the principles of light for me. We
Yeah.
start to learn to include compassion, self discipline, and we start to work towards harmony.
It's so true, though. I mean, when you go through this path and you start to understand and learn these things, it's that old proverb: the more you learn, the less you know. Because the more you learn, the more you realize that this blueprint you've had this whole time was something that was passed down to you and you've modified based on your own experiences, and your experiences aren't what define reality to a degree. That's debatable, but more in different contexts.
Yeah, but it also brings us to once you know better, you have to do better.
Yes.
If you want to grow, if you want to take on betterment.
Well, and I think that right there is one of the most important lessons. So, kind of like how Justin was saying, it's like make sure you talk to, if you're seeing a therapist or a counselor, to talk to them before you do any of this, because there's so many people that get into the healing space, the spiritual space, and they start doing all the work, all the digging and uncovering, and they see all this stuff, and then they get stuck there. And so many people wish they would have never done it, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You have to do the work that comes with that, or you're never going to change from it, and it's just going to tear you down more. So once you know better, you got to do better, because that's the only way to truly develop the change. Awareness is only 20% of the work.
So let's move into some of those inner roadblocks that we encounter. Let's start with fear.
Fear's a good one. I think fear holds a lot of people back, because fear is such a predominant emotion. I'm not going to say it's the most dominant. I think the most dominant emotion is shame. Fear in itself is such a dictating force in people's lives. And again, I talk about the spectrum of people who are either passive or aggressive. And fear is what guides both these sides. And the stronger your fear, the more you're probably going to pull in one way or the other. There's a lot of tyrannical people out there, and yeah, they may seem self-assured and domineering in their opinions, but at the heart of it, they are scared. There is so much fear of being seen for who they truly are, being seen for being weak. And then on the other side, you got people who are passive, where there's that fear of losing control. There's that fear of not being good enough, which I think is actually in both sides of the spectrum. But yeah, I think fear is a great place to start when it comes to this. What are your thoughts with fear?
Fear is a big one. And let's not confuse fear with caution. Caution is important. You shouldn't be walking out in front of buses. That's not fear, that's caution. You might be scared of getting hit by a bus, but that's caution, right? I always get into these, I wouldn't say arguments, but discussions about the semantics of fear. I'll have people tell me fear is good. It helps you not catch on fire and jump off buildings and get hit by buses and things like that. That's caution. We're talking about fear, the kind of fear that holds you back, the kind of fear
Yeah,
that brings doubt, the kind of fear that brings confusion.
confusion and control.
Fear has many consorts within human nature, and this comes directly from the Ashla teachings. Fear has many consorts within human nature, yet it is no friend or ally to any universal or cosmic power, at least not any universal or cosmic power of light. Fear is powerful when it comes to the dark, but not the light. If someone thinks that it's fear that renders aid or comfort from time to time while one walks the road of life, they are mistaken. We must not confuse fear with caution. For every obstruction or challenge, quote unquote, fear seems to help us avoid or negotiate, ever so subtly, it erodes our confidence. It erodes our perseverance, and it corrupts our logic and reason, creating disharmony. And this kind of brings us to kind of some of the more traditional teachings we hear on this path. Fear, anger, and hate are precursors to doubt, confusion, envy, and suffering. We cannot let these things, and fears at the front of that, we cannot let these influence or dictate our interactions, our thoughts, our feelings, our dealings, because that will lead us to something opposite of betterment. It will create stagnation. It can create a loss of movement, keeps us from moving forward
Yeah.
on this path. So fear, we we oftentimes get stuck thinking that fear saves the day. Our fear of something. Well, yeah, I mean, because I was scared of this, I didn't go out there and I didn't get hurt. I didn't get emotionally hurt. I didn't get physically hurt. I didn't. That is not a friend. Fear is not a friend or ally to anyone on the path of light. It actually helps move you towards the other way.
Yeah. I mean, what's again, I was bringing it up earlier, but what's at the heart of fear? Almost every time, it's control. And it's the fear of the unknown, fear of letting go, it's fear of not being enough. The more you release that need for control, the need for everything to go perfect, the more things will fall into place and the more the world will open up to you, the more you will feel whole within yourself. And that's not something you just do at the flip of a switch. It takes work, it takes dedication when you feel fear to act despite of it. I mean, what is courage? Courage is not devoid of fear, but to act in the face of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing that comes to mind when I think of fear, it's in regards to a relationship. Loving without fear allows us to experience freedom within the relationships we have. We don't have fences and walls built around ourselves or our counterparts. When you love without fear, you're bound by mutual agreements that each person chooses to abide by freely by choice, instead of these we talked about before, these kind of unspoken expectations.
All right, the three main causes of suffering: attachment, judgment, and expectation, unspoken expectation.
When I've experienced fear, it's usually been within relationships for me. And we can go 14 hours and talk about why that is, why
Yeah.
Justin experiences fear in relationships. I don't anymore, because when I say loving without fear allows us to experience freedom within a relationship, that's because I found that kind of little secret for me where I love without expectation. I love without attachment. Now, when I say that, when I say I love without attachment, it means I am attached to my wife in a more positive way where I like being around her. I like being in her life, but I don't have the fear of loss because that takes away gratitude. That takes away confidence within the relationship. You start to get kind of sketchy. You start to think that everybody's out to get you, type of thing, especially if you've been kind of busted on your last relationships. If somebody hurt you really bad, you
Yeah.
have to love without fear. You have to remove fear. And you're talking about that this is a step-by-step thing. Yes, defeat fear one thing at a time. But as you do that, every time you defeat the kind of fear that holds you hostage, you find a little more freedom, a little bit by little bit, life by little bit. It's not, one and done thing. I still have fears that I have to defeat, not caution, but fear.
And it's so hard because in life, I mean, we grew up being so attached. I mean, attachment's a part of life. One of the big areas I want to focus in my psychology degree is attachment theory because it's so fascinating to me. But especially in relationships, and I'm guilty of this myself, where I have been in a relationship and when I felt that lack of control, I felt that things were out of alignment and I had so much desire for this relationship. It slowly changed me, and I saw that. I saw how I was clinging, how I was becoming shifty because I was trying to manage everything. And when you get to that point, you start changing who you are for those situations, and that's not love.
Yeah,
That's not that's attachment. And I think that's one thing we confuse often is the difference between love and attachment,
yeah. Well,
because attachment is this person is filling my needs. Love is I bring happiness to your life, you bring happiness to my life, but you are not my center of my happiness, nor am I yours.
and in relation to our teachings, again, we look at attachment as simply the fear of loss. And that could be with people, which it usually is that. It could be things, circumstances, whatever. Beliefs. People struggle with attachment to belief because they're afraid to lose themselves if they change their beliefs. We're not talking about not because there is a good way to be attached to somebody. Again, I'm attached to Heather in a way that allows me to care for her without boundaries, to take care of her when she's sick, make sure she's always safe, all this stuff. That form of attachment is me consciously giving her myself, all of myself. But I'm not afraid to lose her because nothing in this universe, in this configuration that we are talking in and that we are experiencing right now, lasts forever. There is my belief, there is something beyond this, and we continue on in one form or the other. But if the universe takes her, or if she decides that she needs to move on, I must respect that. I must honor that. I must love her enough to always support her freedom and her free will. So
Yes.
those are kind of the attachments we're talking about, are the ones where you're afraid to lose, so you do whatever. It becomes the ends justify the means argument, which is never good. So We're talking about fear, and we'll move on to the exercise here. But the nature of fear is really quite simple to understand. At the end of the day, it's dangerous, slippery. It lurks in the shadows, most times, shadows of our mind, like a scavenger waiting to feed on us, on our mind and soul and heart. And it's there to control us, as you said so perfectly. It's not something we consider a lot. That fear is almost like a thing that waits for us to be taken advantage of. So, did you have
Yeah.
anything? Do you have anything more before we move on to the exercise?
No, I think we touch base on pretty much everything here.
The exercise we're going to do today is called the Influence Audit. I want you to list the top 5 influences in your life. They could be people, habits, environments, different types of media, whatever those 5 things are for you. They'll probably be different for each of us. For each of those 5 things, I want you to ask yourself, does this influence uplift or hinder me? Now, if any of those do hinder you, take one of them, because we always like to work on things one at a time. We want to take our time, really get to the bottom of things, and then move on once we're done. Identify one negative influence to address and create for yourself an action plan to minimize its impact. Now, there's no time limit on this. It may take you days, months, maybe a couple of years. It's fine. This is not a race, as we are so fond of saying. The goal is to be better, a little bit every day. Our affirmation for the day is, I am aware of the influences in my life. I release what does not serve me and align with what uplifts and empowers me. My journalers, write this down. I want you to reflect on a time when you realized an influence in your life was a negative or an improper one. How did this recognition change your behavior? And what can you do now to cultivate positive influences? Because really, we have to be aware of the negative influences we have on others too. It's not just everybody's out to get us. We do it too, and sometimes we don't know it. Our question of the day: what was your aha moment when you recognized a negative influence in your life? Share your story and how you broke free using hashtag breaking free. Do you have anything you want to leave with our esteemed audience today, Michael?
One thing I want to add when you take this inventory, when you look at the things in your life that influence you, when you're in a bad place in life, if you feel isolated, alone, one of the things you might want to add to that list is yourself. So often when we get lost in our heads, the world is isolating more and more. That's actually the biggest influence on us and biggest negative influence on us. And it's important to have people who share your values or who is becoming or who is at the level you want to be. Associate yourself with people who are better than you. And I don't mean that in a condescending way, but the people who have obtained the goals you want in life. Those are the kind of people you want to be around because, as we said earlier, you are who you spend your time with. And if you're spending your time only with yourself, that can be self destructive all within itself. So that's my last little piece of thought, food for thought.
All right, well done. So before we go, I want to encourage you to do the influence audit. Use the affirmation for a week. See how it goes for you. I also want you to get out there in your groups and your circles of people that you travel with and your spheres of influence, and start a discussion around this topic today. Try to challenge or identify and then reduce harmful influences collectively. Be honest with each other. See how you're influencing each other. Doesn't have to be a big thing, and you don't need to feel bad about doing something that may be hurting someone, because if you're honest about it, then you can work to fix that and work to atone for that. We all do it. I was recently made aware of some harm that I was doing to others, and I had no idea, but I worked to atone that because it was brought to my attention. And then it's up now my duty to atone for that and work towards reducing, at the very least, reducing the harm that I'm doing without knowing it, but work to just not do it anymore. I'll leave you guys with this. The axiom for the day was, before you can break free of negative or improper influences, you must first recognize them. Before you can break free of the shackles of negative or improper influences, you must first become aware of their presence. The greatest lie ever told is the one we tell ourselves. Damaging mental programs can subtly incapacitate our thoughts and actions before we even get started. By using the inventory process, by taking an honest look at yourself through introspection and contemplation, you you can begin to become aware of them. As you continue to explore what makes you tick, you can then take the necessary steps to remove them. A wise person practices alchemy within to ensure a positive and prosperous change for the better. This alchemy requires self-awareness. When negative thoughts, judgments, and harmful emotions seek to hijack and control the direction of our actions. Self-awareness is where we start to make the changes in our lives that make the most impact. By understanding the little things that make us tick, we can then know where we want to make changes. Change is a fundamental part of betterment. There is always room for improving the self. I will assume that almost everyone listening to this podcast is striving to better themselves in one way or the other. After all, that's the goal of this podcast, to help us all get better. These changes must be in the way we think, the way we judge ourselves and others, and in catching the triggers that send us into a tailspin. As we recognize these more and more, we can apply conscious effort to choose a different thought, a different word, and a different action. So let the light of your awareness shine brightly, revealing the influences that seek to hold you captive. With this knowledge, you possess the key to unlock the chains that bind you, paving the way for a journey toward greater freedom and self-mastery. Thank you all so very much for being with us today. With love and gratitude, Ad Lucem.
Ad Lucian.